We are going to begin with the first session of Block 4 of Paper 9 of MA Final. An introduction to Caribbean poetry. Caribbean poetry comprises any form of poem, rhyme, or lyric that derives from the Caribbean region and writers of the Caribbean diaspora, particularly after the mid 1970s and 1980s. Caribbean poetry gained increasing visibility with the publication in Britain and North America of several anthologies over the years. The canon has shifted and expanded, drawing both on oral and literary traditions and with different styles, evolving in response to the changing social and political scenes. Caribbean poets include Derek Walcott, winner of the 1992 Nobel Prize for Literature, Kamau Braithwaite, international winner of the 6th annual Griffin Poetry Prize in 2006, and Jamaican born Linton Kawaji Johnson, who in 2002 became only the second living poet to be published in the Penguin Modern Classics series. Anthony Kelman is the originator of the Caribbean poetic form, Tukwas, which incorporates melodical and rhythmical elements of Barbadian indigenous folk music called Tuk. His 2008 book, Limestone, an epic poem of Barbados, is the first published epic of Barbados. From its earliest beginnings in the 18th century, Caribbean or West Indian poetry has been an elusive, dynamic art. Though sometimes static, it has always been an evolving art form. According to one scholar, Lowell W. Brown, the first 180 years of the West Indian poetry were uneven at best. However, Brown was appraising only the formal aspect of Caribbean poetry, a poetic tradition that was imposed on the peoples of the West Indies first by a slavocracy and later by an imperialist regime. There has always been an oral tradition in the Caribbean, and although this tradition has been suppressed, it could never be completely destroyed. It has existed in children's ring games, in calypso, and in the combined arts of carnival, Junkanu, and other folk and religious celebrations. Then, too, the unwritten tradition of the Amerindians has enriched the art of Caribbean poetry. Ironically, after years of suppression, the folk and oral traditions combined with other aspects of Afro American, Afro Caribbean cultural experiences are theorized by Edward Kamau Braithwaite as the wellspring of nation language. Derek Walcott. Derek Anton Walcott, born on 23rd January 1930, is a Saint Lucian poet and playwright. He received the 1992 Nobel Prize in Literature. He is currently professor of poetry at the University of Essex. His works include the Homeric epic poem Omeros 1990, which many critics view as Walcott's major achievement. In addition to having won the Nobel, Walcott has won many literary awards over the course of his career, including an Obey Award in 1971 for his play Dream on Monkey Mountain, a MacArthur Foundation Genius Award, a Royal Society of Literature Award, the Queen's Medal for Poetry, the inaugural OCM Bocas Prize for Caribbean Literature, the 2011 T.S. Eliot Prize for his book of poetry, White Egrets. As a young man, Walcott trained as a painter, mentored by Harold Simmons, whose life as a professional artist provided an inspiring example for him. Walcott greatly admired Nani and Glorioni and sought to learn from them. He studied as a writer, becoming an elated, exuberant poet, madly in love with English and strongly influenced by modernist poets such as T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound. He had an early sense of a vocation as a writer. His epic poem Omeron 1990, which loosely echoes and refers to characters from the Iliad, has been critically praised as Walcott's major achievement. The book received praise from publications such as the Washington Post and the New York Times Book Review, which chose the book as one of its best books of 1990. His later poetry collections include Taipolo's Hound 2000, illustrated with copies of his watercolors, The Prodigal 2004, and White Egrets 2010, which received T.S. Eliot Prize. Walcott's major works, first we would discuss here poems. 25 poems published in 1948, Epitaph for the Young, 12 cantos 1949, poems 1953, In a Green Night, poems 1962, Selected Poems 1964, The Castaway, a very important poem by him, was published in 1965. The Gulf and Other Poems, another collection of important poems and widely discussed, analyzed, and even criticized. The Gulf and Other Poems 1969. Another Life, long poem, was published in 1973. Sea Grapes were published in 1976. Selected Verse 1976. The Star Apple Kingdom 1979. The Fortunate Traveler 1981. Selected Poetry 1981. Midsummer 1984. The Arakan's Testament, another important work, was published in 1987, and the most important, Omeros, was published in 1990. The Bounty, 97. Taipolo's Hound, 2000. The Prodigal, book-length poem. This is one of the longest poems by Walcott. It was published in 2004. White Egrets were published in 2010. His plays, Cry for the Leader, was published in 1950. Robin and Andrea, 1950. Three Assassins, 1951. The Price of Mercy, 1951. Crossroads, 1954. Ione, a play with music, a new development into this genre, and his major contribution was published in 1957. Drums and Colors, 1958. Jormungand, 1959. Dream on a Monkey Mountain and Other Plays, 1970. In a Fine Castle, 1970. Oh, Babylon, 1976. Remembrance, another important work by him, was published in 1970. The Joker of Seville, 1978. Mary Lowell, 1979. The Isle is Full of Noises, 1982. Three plays contains The Last Carnival, Beef, No Chickens, and Branch of the Blue Nile. They were published in 1986. Steel, 1991. The Odyssey, a stage version, 1993. The Capeman, 1998. The Haitian Trilogy were published in 2002. All interpretation of Derek Walcott's Crusoe Journal. This is another very important work and which needs a thorough study and careful analysis. Walcott's poem is a meditation on the kind of poetic and cultural transformation needed to survive against the complicated Caribbean experience of colonization. His figure of Crusoe is a shapeshifter like the mythic figure of Proteus, who not only learns how to adapt to changing circumstances, but also how to make a poetic symbol by which he understands the world. The figure of Crusoe is both individualistic and communal. He is communal because he is representative of the Caribbean people. He shapes his journey, experience, poem in much the same way that Walcott describes the shaping of a culture in his noble address, The Antilles. Fragments of epic memory. Crusoe brings together a ruin of objects and symbols and cultural fragments in order to construct a new vision. Yet, the same process in the poem is fraught with loneliness. Crusoe, the maker, is alone in such a project. Self commented. My Crusoe, then, is Adam. Christopher Columbus, God, a missionary, a beachcomber, and his interpreter Daniel Defoe. He is Adam because he is the first inhabitant of this second paradise. He is Columbus because he has discovered this new world by accident, by fatality. He is God because he teaches himself to control his creation. He rules the world he has made, and also because he is to Friday a wide concept of Godhead. He is a missionary because he instructs Friday in the uses of religion. He is a beachcomber because I have imagined him as one of those figures of adolescent literature, some derelict of Conrad or Stevenson, and finally, he is also Daniel Defoe because the Journal of Crusoe, which is Defoe's journal, is written in prose, not in poetry. And our literature, the pioneers of our public literature, have expressed themselves in prose. I have tried to show that Crusoe's survival is not purely physical, not a question of life, not a question of the desolation of his environment, but a triumph of will. We contemplate our spirit by the detritus of the past. Derek Walcott's poem, A Far Cry from Africa, deals with the theme of split identity and anxiety caused by it in the face of the struggle in which the poet could side with neither party. It is in short about the poet's ambivalent feelings towards the Kenyan terrorists and the counter terrorist white colonial government, both of which were inhuman during the independence struggle of the country in the 1950s. The persona probably the poet himself can make favor of none of them since both blood circulate along his veins. Beginning with a dramatic setting, the poem opens a horrible scene of bloodshed in African territory. Blood streams, scattered corpses, worms show ghastly sights of battle. Native blacks are being exterminated like Jews in Holocaust following the killing of a white child in its bed by blacks. The title of the poem involves an idiom, a far cry, means an impossible thing. But the poet seems to use the words in other senses also. The title suggests, in one sense, that the poet is writing about an African subject from a distance. Writing from the island of St. Lucia, he feels that he is at a vast distance, both literally and metaphorically, from Africa. A far cry may also have another meaning that the real state of the African paradise is a far cry from the Africa that we have read about in descriptions of gorgeous fauna and flora and interesting village customs. And a third level of meaning to the title is the idea of Walcott's hearing the poem as a far cry coming all the way across thousands of miles of ocean. He hears the cry coming to him on the wind. He writes, I who am poisoned with the blood of both, where shall I turn? Divided to the vein. This sad ending illustrates a consequence of displacement and isolation. Walcott feels foreign in both cultures due to his mixed blood. An individual sense of identity arises from cultural influences which define one's character according to a particular society's standards. The poet's hybrid heritage prevents him from identifying directly with one culture, thus creates a feeling of isolation. Walcott is constantly torn between choice and disapproval. Though he abhors the erstwhile British colonizers, he is deeply in love with the English language. To him, English is not the property of English. It is the property of imagination. It is the property of language itself. And language belongs to the person who makes a successful use of it. Walcott has taught at a number of universities since 1970s, such as Yale University, Columbia University, Boston University, etc. Along with his stay in the United States, he has been visiting the Caribbean frequently. This movement between the USA and the Caribbean is reflected in his 1981 poetry collection entitled The Fortunate Traveler. The collection evinces his diasporic or exilic inclinations, as he says in the Hotel Normandy Pool: corruption, censorship, and arrogance make exile seem a happier thought than home. In an interview also, while talking to while talking of physical separation from his native land, he said, this physical nostalgia for the simple things like warm sea, sun, a certain kind of food. So we can see that however he suffered from the nostalgia, he loved his country, but not to that extent that without any critical eye, he loves his nation so much as to come back, permanently stay there, and sing the songs of the praise of his country. Walcott's definition of poetry is a situation of divine discontent. In this definition is embedded the idea that human beings are in exile, having been exiled from heaven, which is their real home. And the same is expressed in detail in the title poem of his collection, The Arkansas Testament, which were published in 1977. He was of the firm belief that soul comes from heaven, but Plato had said that heaven is the real home of soul. What Nissim Ezekiel also has mentioned in one of his poems, The Enterprise, that soul comes on a journey in this world. Walcott also cherishes the same belief. In the Arkansas Testament, Walcott attempts to find his place among his fellow islanders. Short of doing so, in the book's first section entitled Here, the poet searches other lands. In the elsewhere section, not so much for home, but for goodness and justice. He never finds what he is looking for. In fact, readers would be suspicious if he did. And it is a fact that we all know. It's very difficult to find peace and happiness for all the times anywhere in this world. Life is not a series of gig lamps symmetrically arranged. Hardy also has mentioned that life is the general drama of pain in which happiness is but in occasional episodes. The predicament that he discusses, see, as he presents it in the first section, is that his demonstration of love for Saint Lucia in poetry is useless. For the islanders' language is not a written one. In the first 6 poems, written in lean quatrains, the poet arrives at this dark understanding and erects pillars in appearance and function, upon which the rest of the collection is built. In the lighthouse, the first poem, Walcott's speaker walks through the Castries, a seaport on St. Lucia and Walcott's birthplace, to the new Jerusalem Bar, where he meets an old friend who has left the island only once in his 50 years. The man is completely comfortable at home, but the speaker is ill at ease. He sees dots to be connected everywhere, unstated, questions to be answered, stars appear as those to be connected dots in a child's book, and black hands in a corner slap down dominoes. The speaker seems to wonder if his love for St. Lucia and for its people must always be bitterly incomplete. And we often find people moving from pillar to post to various nook and corners of the world in search of peace and happiness. Nissim Ezekiel has mentioned in his poem, The Enterprise, that home is the place where we have to gather grace. If it is possible to gather any grace that can be gained only at home, for that we need not wander here and there to the pilgrim place of this deity or that deity, seeking blessings from here or there. Robert Frost has mentioned, earth is the right place for love. I don't know where else to go better. In another important poem, Cul du Sac Valley, Walcott sets out to answer this question. Since his demonstration of love is poetry, he attempts to give the written word to the people by using linguistics and poetic terms in his description. A dog is a black owl barking, chalk flowers, scribble, the asphalt's black slate, and a girl climbs straight up the steps of this verse. In Rousseau Valley, however, Walcott questions the use of this gift. My lines led to what? They proved no comfort like the French priests. Oh, the workers' hymns. Later, in the same poem, he attempts to legitimize his poetry by marrying it to the land. My gift still sweats with the trickling resin in a hill's hot armpit. In the fourth poem, a Latin primer is a digression in which Walcott recalls his development as a poet. His grouping, his groping for a voice and for a resolution to his conflict. When he sees a frigate bird that slowly leveling made one with my horizon, he understands that the process of finding his place as an islander is as important as the process result. The image of the frigate bird and its meaning charge the poet with purpose, and the villa restaurant. He celebrates the commonplace of his environment. The waitress whose breasts are clay goblets. The blue Gasco behind her. Head is my Sistine Chapel. In the three musicians, the speaker's voice at times blends with that of Madame Isidore, the poem's main character. In this humorous, ironic retelling of the story of the three wise men, the speaker slips into the island dialect, signal the momentary union he feels with his heritage. However, is the feeling Walcott surrounds the pillars of his first six poems with balanced gathering of what makes up Saint Lucia, the history, religion, and superstition, the people and the places. Yet he returns several times to the nagging feeling of homelessness which preoccupies his art. And in the light of the world, perhaps the collection's most powerful and moving poem, Walcott's speaker is at once united with and isolated from the people around him. The setting is a minibus filled with the music of Bob Marley, and at moments the speaker seems unself conscious, just another person heading somewhere. He enjoys the music and quietly lusts after a young woman who is humming along with it. He writes, I imagine a powerful and sweet odor coming from her as from a still panther, and the head was nothing else but heraldic. Soon, however, an old woman trying to catch the transport breaks the speaker's peace. Don't leave me stranded, she says. And he thinks of abandonment, of how he has abandoned his people, and hence of how he is abandoned. I got off the van without saying good night. Thank you.